Hello, this is an overview of the Tamron AF 70-300mm telephoto lens.
And here's a close-up of the lens. The first things to point out are you have the standard autofocus manual focus switch here. You also have the macro button here. The lens itself weighs 435 grams, which is slightly lighter than some of the competing lenses at the same focal range. The aperture range of this lens is F4-5.6 all the way up to F32. And the actual casing of the lens is made out of plastic. Now, in terms of the macro function, in order to actually turn it on, you have to extend the barrel of the lens beyond 180 mil. You also need to be standing around about 1 meter away from the subject before you can actually focus in properly in the macro mode.
And here we have the lens attached to a Canon 20D digital camera. When set to 300mm, the barrel of the lens extends this far. It's worth pointing out with this lens that focusing is generally quite noisy and can take quite a while to focus in. This is even more apparent when you've got the lens set to macro mode. So when you are in macro mode, it's probably advantageous to change the focusing to manual mode. I'll give you an example now of what the focusing is like. Now, if you compare this to, say, a competing lens such as the Canon 70-300mm, which has a USM ring motor, the Canon will focus probably in about half the time and also do it a lot quieter. One other thing to point out about this lens is that when you have it set to manual mode and you are using the focusing ring at the front, it feels very light to the touch. Now, this is in contrast to some of the other competing lenses, such as the Sigma or the Canon, where you feel a slight amount of resistance when you're trying to move the focusing ring around. This is a slight disadvantage that it is so light to the touch, because it means that when you are trying to focus in, particularly when you're set to 300mm for example, it can be quite difficult to get the focusing exactly spot on. I have also noticed with this lens that there is a small amount of lens creep when you're trying to take pictures directly upwards or directly downwards. This is something which you will not find in some of the competing lenses, such as with the Canon. Now, in terms of image quality, here is a typical image taken with this Tamron 70-300. Here we have it at 70mm, and this image here zooms in all the way to 300mm. Now, when you're taking pictures with this lens, particularly zoomed in to the full focal length, you will notice sometimes a slight amount of chromatic aberration. And chromatic aberration is when you're taking a picture, you'll see a slight fuzziness around the edges of some of the objects in your picture. And typically this will be between, say, the actual object and, say, the skyline, for example. It's not a massive problem, but you do notice it in some shots, so it's something to be aware of. So again, a couple of other pictures to look at. Here's one at 70mm and zoomed in all the way at 300mm. Now then, a couple of macro photos so you can see how good the macro is. It's a pretty sharp macro. It does take a while to focus in with the Tamron, but once it does lock in, then you're going to get a pretty good shot. It might be advantageous to use the manual focus when it comes to the macro work, and it would obviously be better if you were taking pictures using a tripod. You can see full res versions of these photos if you go to my website. Now, if you're looking to purchase a 70-300mm lens, I thought I'd point out there's a couple of alternatives that are available. This is the Tamron that I've been discussing. Alternatively, there is the Sigma 70-300. If you have a Nikon digital camera, you could get the Nikon 70-300 that we have here. And if you have a Canon digital camera, you could always go for the Canon 70-300. The Tamron typically is the lightest of the four lenses. And also, in terms of actual size, they're all pretty much the same, with the exception of the Canon. The Nikon is possibly the smallest, but it is pretty negligible. The Tamron and the Sigma lens both have a macro function. whereas the Nikon and the Canon do not. So that's one advantage of these two lenses. They're slightly more versatile. The Canon, as you can see here, is a bit bigger than the other three, and this will be because it has within the lens itself, it has image stabilization, which is quite a considerable advantage, particularly when you're taking photographs either in low light levels or when you're zoomed in fully to 300mm. The Canon also has a USM ring motor, which means that focusing is going to be quicker and quieter compared to the other three. Now, in terms of price, the Tamron that we have here, brand new, this will retail for typically £170 online. You could purchase this lens second-hand or refurbished, and that will make it a bit cheaper. And typically the refurbished or second-hand price would be between £60 to £130, so you can get it a bit cheaper. The Sigma lens here is very similarly priced to the Tamron. Brand new, the Sigma is typically about £150, £160, and again, second-hand or refurbished, that drops the price down to between £60 and £130 again. The Nikon lens here is the cheapest of the four that I'm showing you. Brand new, the Nikon 70-300 typically costs about just under £100. And again, if you were to buy it second-hand or refurbished, that drops the price down again, probably to about £50, £60. There's also another type of Nikon 70-300, and that is a lens with vibration reduction, which is Nikon's image stabilization. This will be considerably more expensive, and the typical price for the vibration reduction version of this lens is typically about £400 brand new. Second hand, you can drop that price down to maybe £320. Finally, with this lens here, which is the Canon 70-300, this is the most expensive of the four lenses that I've showed you. The Canon brand new will retail online for between £380 to £430 typically, and again, second hand, you're probably talking between £280 to £350, I think. There is one other lens which is 70-300, made by Canon, and that is the diffractive optics lens. It's the same focal range as this one, but the difference is it's a slightly different technology which basically produces a smaller lens, and the diffractive optics lens is typically a lot shorter but also quite a lot fatter as well. But the diffractive optics Canon lens is also a lot more expensive, and brand new you're probably talking about £1,100 for that lens, and second hand probably about £700. So, in conclusion, I would say the Tamron 70-300 is a cheap and cheerful lens. I think you really kind of get what you pay for with this lens. It's about half the price of the Canon 70-300, but it also means it's a lot cheaper, but it means that you're not going to get the bells and whistles that the Canon one does. It doesn't have image stabilization. It doesn't have the sort of like the USM ring motor, which is going to mean that focusing is going to probably take about up to twice as long on this lens than as opposed to the Canon, and also focusing is noisier with this lens. But it's a lot cheaper. It's got the macro function, which means the lens is more versatile. So yeah, in terms of image quality, I would say that provided the environment is exactly right, you've got the right lighting and that sort of thing going on, and you take a picture with this lens, it would be hard, I think, to distinguish between the image produced with this lens and an image produced with a more expensive lens like the Canon 70-300. However, when the environment isn't exactly how you'd like it, which is generally most of the time, the Canon will deal with that situation a lot better than the Tamron will. The Canon will focus a lot quicker, it will pick out what you're trying to focus in on a lot quicker as well, and that sort of thing. So yeah, there we go. I hope you found this overview useful, and if you want to check out any more video reviews of SLR lenses and cameras, go to my YouTube channel, which is SLR Lens. Thanks.